the stars be with you.
All right, everyone. I'm so happy to welcome this week's special guest, Mars Gradiva. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thanks.
So, Mars, tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm just meeting you as well because you were a reference from Aquila, who was on a few episodes ago. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am an astrologer, I guess, and a musician, and I live in Montreal. And yeah, I'm a human.
As we all are.
Sometimes, yeah. I'm into that.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I don't know. That's me.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all you need to be, because that's all anybody really, that's all anybody should expect of you to be. And maybe that's why we have this answer today, because we're focusing on the topic of queer astrology and the limitation of gender binary. And why I was so excited to bring Mars on, because you have a fabulous essay that you have written and placed online under the under being a maybe astrologer. I'm going to say that you probably are, because it was very well written from what I could read. And so I just want to pick your brain a little bit about the topic of, obviously you're passionate about it and have a lot to share. So I want to hear what you have to share with other people. And so I guess to get started here, what is queer astrology? What makes queer astrology queer, I guess, in a sense?
I think that astrology in and of itself is queer. Maybe you got from the essay that I'm very interested in the definition of words and the etymology of words as opposed to the colloquial use of words. And queer in its original definition means something that is different from the norm. And that's how it's used as applied to people's lifestyles or choices or orientations or genders colloquially now. But the norm that we live in is all about division. It's all about you are in this little box and this is all you can ever be. But astrology is look, you're this giant cycle of this very fluid experience of identity and gender. So I think that astrology just in and of itself is a very queer thing. And I think that's why it's being so heavily devalued by a pretty oppressive culture and colonial mindset.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating topic, and I totally agree with you. And it's not just astrology or even gender; it's in the world is like that. And I mean, you can see that here in America. I know you're over in Canada.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about everything over here, but it's that same type of dividing line or division that essentially puts people and things into boxes, and that box doesn't always fit what you're trying to shove into it. It's like that old game that you used to play when you were a kid, where you take the block and you put it in the square, right, or the circle and you put it in the but sometimes it's not always as cut and dry as that. And so I really am enthusiastic about this topic, and I think queer is associated obviously with, like you were saying, it has metamorphosed into representing a group of people, really. But it just started off as being something odd or different. And as a person with Uranus exactly conjunct my ascendant, and trine my sun and sextile my moon, trust me, I'm all about the different and the unusual and just being quirky, because we're all unique. And that's what makes us odd or different. So so now tell me about gender binary and how it is limiting, and maybe how that fits into astrology, because I know that was a very much the focus of your essay.
Well, gender binary is a lie. I'm just going to put that one out there as that is the assumption that I'm going forward with, everything else that I'm going to say from here on out. I'm coming with the assumption that I believe, and maybe you believe, and the people who are listening believe, that the gender binary is not real. And it's made up for a very intentional purpose, which is to divide people And it's interesting that you brought up Uranus and Aquarius as by extension of that planet. I was just thinking about this archetype and how it's so much about how like everyone in the world is really unique. And that is the thing that we all have in common.
Yeah, right.
The thing that makes us all humble and the same is the fact that we're all totally different. And having the chance to like express yourself as a unique person is the beautiful diversity that gives us these like miraculous jumps in evolution, whether it's social evolution or like genetic evolution. It all really comes down to diversity. Diversity is a really important thing.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And honoring diversity is like such a central part of life, really. And the gender binary is just like, if you have these genitals, you have to be this way. If you have these genitals, other genitals, you have to be this way. And if you're in between, we're going to fuck with you until you fit our box. And that is done in like incredibly violent ways, and violent ways that are like very physical as well. Like what happens to intersex people, the total crime that happens to intersex people. And then also just like the socialization that everyone experiences. So the purpose of, or I guess the introduction of my essay was talking about how the gender binary, as we're kind of like socialized to understand it, is represented by two planetary symbols, and realistically by extension, two kind of like astrological archetypes. You know, there's Mars is men, supposedly, and Venus is women. And what I was trying to deconstruct there is that, well, obviously, we're all on Earth.
Yes.
And that's kind of silly to just use that comparison of a spectrum, or not a spectrum, but like a binary experience of the world. And kind of deconstructing how, I guess, like, the gender binary is a tool of patriarchal colonization and oppression, and talking about how if Mars is about men, then, and the patriarchy, and by extension the gender binary, considers that people who are labeled men and people who like live in that socialization and accept it are considered to be better. And so those qualities by this socialized mindset are better or superior. Mm-hmm. And then anything that Venus would represent in contrast to that is inferior. And so Mars represents like war and chaos. And like, look at our world now. It is like total chaos. And there's been like almost eternal war going on for a long, long time, like all over the planet, in a way that like I wouldn't necessarily point to the citizens of any particular country, because it's more, you know, like there are powers that be that are involved with this, and we are all like pawns in it. Yeah. But to kind of go back to the human scale, socializing people who are socialized to be male, to act, or being told that there's a certain amount of like violence or like crisis that is like a necessary part of their identity. And then by extension, teaching them to suppress anything that represents Venus. But Venus is like, you know, Venus is real powerful. Venus isn't just about one body. Venus is about or one gender. It's a multi-gendered kind of archetype. It represents harmony, and so harmony means all things are in harmony. We were just saying we're both musicians, and harmony is many, many different pieces coming together. Like a chord is the harmony between many, many different notes, or a song has harmony by many different chords harmonizing with one another. It's not one singular body. It's about many, many things coming together.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make
something to harmonize with, that it doesn't stand on its own.
Yes. Yes, I love that you brought that up. I didn't even think about that. I'm just rambling. I have Gemini Mars. So.
I have a Gemini Mars too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What degree are you?
8 degrees.
I'm
Retrograde.
9.
Oh, wow.
Mine's not retrograde, but interesting.
Well,
yeah.
I wonder if we're born in the same year.
I don't know. Are you willing to share?
Yeah, I'm in 90.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not the same year. I was born in 79. I'm a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
But
another part of the cycle.
Yeah, kindred spirit. Well, I like what you brought up earlier, though, about talking about just the Martian principle in general, because I'm a Scorpio rising and you're a Scorpio sun, right? And so having that Scorpio rising, because I use traditional rulers, Mars is definitely my ruler. And I have always, even though, I'm born a girl, I have always identified and connected with men more. And I've always been involved in fields that are more masculine. And I really never even thought, I really never even thought about gender actually until it was coming into the forefront of society. Not the forefront, it's not just not there yet. We're talking about it here, but it has become, it has made a lot more awareness than, in any time past for the most part. And so I didn't even think about these issues until they started coming up and people were debating them or said it was a problem. And it is a problem, but I just thought about myself and what it was about myself that I never even tried to connect with that or separate it or feel that I'm a woman or feel that I'm more of a man. Like I've always been in this gray zone where, I just never even thought about it and just did me. And so I find it fascinating. I don't have anything more to add upon it than that, but I just found it fascinating that I never had really occurred to me and how important it was to other people, especially those that were being condemned by it in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and it's just so interesting that you're like bringing up, and we also brought up they're kind of like in a generational difference as well. And I'm looking at people who are also like in a generation younger than me who are now starting to be like, the masters of the internet realistically. And they're just like, gender ain't no thing, they're so ahead of the curve. And I feel like I'm grueling behind. Had to like go through all these realizations about gender, and it's just so part of their culture. And I'm like really excited for,
well, I think
going
that,
through Aquarius.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks a lot too, because, 1990, you're in that Pluto and Scorpio generation, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that that is part of, the process and what it is that is trying to be unearthed by people that are in your generation and bringing these things to the attention of people. So if anything, you're doing the work, whereas my generation, Pluto and Libra people, we're doing it more on a kind of a relational level and dealing with other people and knowing the right ways of interaction and also redefining what relationship looks like, because that has changed over the years and definitely started to change in the 70s when Pluto was in Libra, because, that's when, free love really started to take reign. Like people were doing whatever, a lot of people were divorced. So it speaks a lot to the times that we were born in, and then also that kind of message that we end up sharing through our generation. So, yes, it makes sense.
Totally. And also like, I love talking about this, especially with transits of the outer planets, especially like Pluto or Orcus, like how these are cycles that are so much larger than us. And this, I feel like this kind of like pulls back to the idea of that, how astrology is really queer, as in different to this norm that we live in, that it's just like a language of symbolism. It's just a language, and humans actually know an incredible amount about themselves. And we live in this context in these like, short spans of time, real in comparison to the whole experience of humanity, where we've been denied so much access to the knowledge about ourselves, and especially knowledge about our sexual selves or the genders of ourselves. Was so interesting that we're talking about like Plutonian generations.
Yeah.
And we're like unearthing so much about our need to like have a very deep understanding of our sexual lives and our need to like connect with other people and have the freedom to connect with other people on this really deep level. And the same with Pluto and Libra, you know?
Yeah, I feel like we go together well, like Pluto and Libra and Pluto and Scorpio, like we're kind of continuing on, you know, the facets of relationship and how we identify with other people, you know, what we're going as, especially with intimacy too, because that's, you know, part of the whole thing. And then maybe those Pluto and Sagittarius are just moving beyond it all. They're like,
yes.
yeah. Let's move on to more, you know, like the bigger thing. Let's look at the philosophical picture of it all. But
I've seen some very good memes about it.
because Pluto moves so slow. So I mean, you know, I love going back in history and like kind of looking at mundane aspects of things, but I haven't really gone back and looked at, you know, those Pluto and Libra generation of last time, and Pluto and Scorpio. Obviously Pluto and Capricorn, because, you know, we're having our Pluto return here in the United States. So I've been very interested in what happened with Pluto and Capricorn back in the day. But that would be interesting to kind of go back and look, you know, for how much we know. And especially there are books, I can't think of the title right now, so shame on me, but I know there's one book in particular that focuses on the history of like sex and relationship throughout the world, whatever. And so it'd be interesting to look back and like a resource like that and kind of see what those time periods might have been bringing out in relation to that. Just side thought to me.
Yeah. Interesting. We're talking about like, I was actually just before this, I was thinking about Pluto's transit, like when it was in the opposite sign where it was before. So when it was in Cancer, and the people who are born in Pluto and Gemini were living their adulthood, like their early adulthood, through the Pluto in Cancer transit. But like all of the chaos that is happening right now, and the simultaneous like gender and sexual liberation I see like a real direct mirror to what was happening when Pluto was going through Gemini and Pluto was going through Capricorn. There was like these really intense wars, and that were precursed by really intense gender liberation.
That's true. That's true. I got chills when you said that. Yes, that's a piece to the puzzle for sure, and something to look back upon. Interesting. Well, my mind is spinning right now. Like my mind's going, I just want to think about what we're saying rather than respond to it. And so, you know, okay. Now I want to hear, let's go back to your Mars and Venus. And you were going, you know, you were talking about, you know, how they become these literal manifestations that we try to assign to gender, which is not always so cut and dry. And, you know, especially with Mars and like a warring faction, you know, we all have warring factions within us. That's part of like what we deal with. But what I really liked about what you had written is you talked about Mars and Venus, defining it a little bit more with the idea of victory versus conquer. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that part I drew pretty directly from the Tree of Kabbalah. The Sephiroth that is related to Venus it's called victory. And I don't think I really fully understood it until I read a graphic novel that went pretty heavily over it. Prometheus by Alan Moore. It's really beautiful, and I highly recommend everyone reading it. Where victory is about surrender. It's about like, you know, you surrender to your turbulent emotions. You surrender to love. You surrender to joy. These things involve a necessary process of letting go. Like you're only ever really going to feel joy if you relax. You know?
What?
You're only ever going to feel love if you let go of the need for control, because it's like a fluid experience. But we talk about victory like it's like, if you look in the dictionary definition is someone like, you know, triumphant commanders returning from war, this kind of thing. It's like the decisive superiority in any battle. I think that's I don't think that's verbatim, but I think that's pretty close to what it was. And how these ideas have been totally appropriated and twisted into this very very masculine central, very violent central. And when I say masculine, sometimes I'm kind of referring to this like almost like caricature of this side of humanity. You know, and it's so interesting that these words masculine and femininity, we're using them for so many vastly different meanings.
Yes.
You know, we need more words.
Yeah.
We need to like reinvent and reclaim some words, because there's a lot of things that those things encompass. And they can be really triggering if people only really are talking about it, using those words to talk about something that's like this kind of like divine expression of gender, but someone has only heard talking about masculinity through like the context of today.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, really we have to get past like that any of that lives outside of us, because you know the journey of human consciousness is the whole, and in integrating these aspects of ourself in a harmonized way, if we come back to the harmony of it all, in order to feel whole within ourselves, because we all need that masculine principle, not in a gender sense, but in a way that we go after what it is that we want, and we take action in life, or more assertive, versus maybe the more Venusian principle with, like you're saying, like feeling that love and pleasure and having to open up to something and kind of relinquish any of that assertion in order to receive. And I mean, that's just a one facet of it, but you know, we're all whole, right? Or we're not, we're striving to be. That's essentially what's going on.
Yeah, and we're part of a greater whole. I think like pulling back to like making things really literal, the symbol of Venus, just like the way that it's drawn, like the circle with the little cross underneath, that represents like all things in harmony. Like the circle is femininity, and the stem is masculinity, and then the cross is divinity. You know, these are things that we all have. We have all of those things inside of us, and Venus represents everyone at harmony with themselves, anyone at harmony with themselves, and harmonizing with another person. So harmony can happen inside of yourself, because you have lots of different parts of yourself. You have masculinity, you have femininity, you have like, I'm a human animal, I am also divine. You know, these things harmonize together. And the thing that I was like really trying to point out in that part of the piece was that if the gender binary is characterizing like Martian energy, so chaos, war, and crisis, as superior, then and it kind of like defines that expression of masculinity as like inherently, like it's defined by its oppression of femininity in this context. Then this like patriarchal masculinity is defined by oppressing anyone's ability to have harmony with themselves, like anyone's ability to have harmony with their own experience of gender.
Well, it sounds very limiting on the for a lot of reasons. It feels like even if you align with kind of that hard, viewpoint, if we're talking about more patriarchally aligned folks, you know, to me, it seems like you're cheating yourself, you know, like
totally
on many levels.
Totally. Yeah. It doesn't really help anybody.
Yeah. And so hopefully these are the types of things that are being shaken up. And we've seen it definitely as, you know, we've been living the last, you know, how many months with Jupiter and Scorpio, which has been bringing out a lot of things. Yes.
Go to jail, Michael Cohen. Go to jail.
There's just so much that is going on. And we need it, you know, obviously it's, you know, Jupiter wants growth no matter what. In Scorpio, there is a lot of underbelly that lies there. And so a lot of things are coming up that it's like, all right, well, you know, you can't turn a blind eye to this anymore. It's like in order to grow and move forward as a society and as people, you have to look at, you know, look at it. Look at it dead in the eye, you know? Yeah,
which is so fascinating that, because we're talking about Scorpio and I guess Aries as well, because we're really talking about Mars. And those two signs are all about the truth. Like Aries is all about truth telling,
Yeah, so any fire for the most part, you know, there's honesty there.
Yeah, but especially, honesty. But I really see that with like Aries, because people categorize that sign as kind of violent, but I definitely see it more as like having the courage to stand up and tell the truth when it's dangerous. So someone like, I feel like Chelsea Manning like did like the ultimate Aries thing in the world. So she stood up and she told the truth about something that everyone needed to know, and paid like a really heavy cost for it. Like, and was standing up to like, you know, the biggest bully in the world.
Well, and it makes a lot of sense with Aries because it takes bravery and courage to do so, right? You know, to speak that truth and be the first to do so as well. It takes that type of, once again, we come back to that Martian principle of assertiveness, of whatever that looks like, because that's where the Aries can come in, is like, I can assert myself and have the courage and, you know, to stand up and be honest about a situation. But the only way to do so is for me to take the initiative. And that's a Martian principle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Mm-hmm.
The truth.
This is a fascinating talk so far. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, same.
So, okay, now we've kind of touched on the idea of the patriarchal role in this all, and how like keeping those two factions separate and kind of oppressing that, you know, that feminine principle and that kind of Venusian energy helps men stay in power, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, or like that's kind of the goal.
Yeah.
And you wrote about like the misappropriation of archetype within it all. Of these archetypal elements. And I mean, I don't even know if I'm going anywhere with this question, but can you speak on that at all, or like the misappropriation of archetype and in the way that everything's set up?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they've appropriated and twisted a lot of things, you know, people who want, because it's great that we were just talking about Aries. It's like, that like the thing that Aries is fighting is deception. Really, when it like in the divine expression of Aries, what it's fighting is deception, and it's a deception that people are divided.
Yeah,
that we're separate, you know, and it's even kind of deception the way that popular astrology has been used kind of in the more like open public market of it, where it's just like, you are this one archetype, you are your sun sign, and that's it, and that's all you're ever going to be, and this is all that astrology is. But the zodiac, the archetypes of the zodiac are inseparable from one another. You know, it's a cycle.
It's a story.
Totally. And just like, I love when people come to me to get their birth charts read, and I'm like, well, look at the houses. You are actually all of the archetypes. You know, you have all the possibility and the need to, even if you have an empty house or whatever, like that is still a need that you have in your life. And how do you fulfill that? How do you go about fulfilling these needs? And I feel like that.
It's interesting with the sun sign, like you're like your sun sign and that's all you are. And the sun sign is like, if you get to be that, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, the sun is actually like the consciousness and like what we kind of evolved to. And so to even think that we are not necessarily on the sun's level from the get-go is a misconception. So I like what you're saying about that with the whole, that does fit into the archetype, because we are not just those things. Of course, we're going to identify it because, you know, on a soul level, we know that it's there, but we are constantly bringing it to the surface by, you know, experiencing transits to the archetype itself, and from different planets, you know, like chiming in the whole time. So I really like what you say there. We're full of archetypes, every single one of us, and we're living different ones at different times, based on our personal journey in life. And so, yes.
Yes. And it's like, and I also love how they're just such, all of these archetypes represent like parts of our bodies. And even if you don't have like all of the body parts, you know, it's still parts of like your internal systems, how it all works. Like you need this Librian balance between your whole life. People need kidneys,
Yeah.
People need a liver.
People need a liver.
People need a liver, People need lungs.
Oh my
Gemini.
Yeah.
People need a nervous system. Everybody's got a nervous system. Everyone's got guts.
Yeah, I wish I could turn mine down a little bit, that nervous system part.
Yeah. Mars and Gemini.
Well, Mars and Gemini, Uranus conjunct the ascendant. I'm twitching right now.
You look great, Jill.
It's all facade, people. All facade. Yes, no, you're absolutely right about that, because you can even look at that as in that literal sense of body parts, that translate that into the archetype of the spiritual body in a way, how we still need all these facets in order to be this whole being. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. Now, you're going to say?
Yeah. I guess I was just going to go into a spiel, if that's cool.
Give me a spiel. I want a spiel.
Okay. Yeah. I guess it's kind of pulling off of the context that we live in. We live in the context of patriarchy. And so certain people in humanity are devalued. And so that means definitely certain archetypes are devalued. And if we all have those archetypes inside of us, then there are going to be certain things that don't really receive a lot of attention. And I think about Virgo a lot. It's just so powerful, and just people just think it's oh, you like to be clean, but it's just so much more than that. It's our intestines and our enteric nervous system. It's I just love Virgo so much.
Oh, I have a North Node in Virgo conjunct Saturn, exactly. So I know square that Mars exactly that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So I feel you on the Virgo level, and I've definitely gotten to know it more and more in my life, because obviously that's part of my journey.
Yeah.
And it's not just exactly. Being clean and, organizing your house. Yes, that could be a little bit a part of it, but there's so much more than that.
Yeah. It's it's such an expansive archetype. I think this thing that I wrote originally came from the desire to write a love letter to Virgo, because people just really don't appreciate it.
They hate on it.
They hate on Virgo so much. They hate on Gemini so much. And it's just what's wrong with Mercury, But yeah, and relating that to our current, the context of our world, and how much food is so used to control the population during the process of colonization of North America. That was a very large part of colonization. And it continued to be a very large part of controlling, the foot soldiers of colonization, the people who settled on this land, the people who were the colonizers of this land. How and it continues to be to this day. What you have access to eating,
and what's being done to your food as well.
Yeah, is affecting your whole body in such this profound way. I think I was, to give a little bit of context to maybe the people who are listening, I was going to go over the kind of elemental genders thing.
Yes, I was going to prompt you on that.
Okay, well, here we are.
Oh,
woo! Yeah. I don't remember what happened first, whether it was because I've always been really fascinated with gender, and I think before I kind of consciously actualized my sun sign, was and in the process came out as a trans person, which is so funny that it goes together. I've always been really fascinated with looking at people's faces, and this is before when I had a very internalized view of the socialization of the gender binary. And I would look at a friend's face who's a man and be there's so many beautiful feminine qualities to this face. And then I would look at a friend's face who's a woman and be there's so many beautiful masculine qualities to this face. And I was deeply obsessed with astrology in a very private way, because I have Pluto in the 9th house. And the more that I was starting to learn about, gender and the world from and learning from external sources about gender, like I felt like I always had like a very strong sense of what gender meant. But like learning what so many other people have written about our socialization of gender, and that there are so many more truths in the world, I started to like really connect the dots of a relationship between gender and the elements. And so a lot of astrologers talk about how the fire and air signs are masculine, and then the earth and water signs are feminine. But if the zodiac is a complete cycle in and of itself, then they're all part of each other. And then I kind of came to this understanding that if there is this like assumption of masculinity in the world and femininity in the world, then I'm all like, my brain is so full. I was like, what words come out next? That then the kind of like caricature of what we consider to be masculinity and the caricature of what is allowed for femininity is aligned like in an incredible way to this the gender, I guess the divine genders, and also the kind of like human gendering of these elements. You know, fire and air are both very like extroverted. They're very like expansive and quick and loud.
Yeah.
Put it out there. They're loud.
What?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the earth signs and water signs are so like, introverted. They're very in themselves, and they're very grounded, and they're very practical and very intuitive, the water signs as well. And I started to just think about how the things that like certain bodies are allowed to do in the world align so exactly with these archetypes. So I'll just kind of go over it a little bit with like, the fire signs, like if Aries is war in a way, then, and for a long time, only men have been allowed to be in the army. Mm. And if Leo is like very regal, almost like kingly, they're like the kings of their personal kingdom, like your sun. The expression of Leo is like the center of the solar system, Then there's been a very long history of only men being allowed to be the rulers of the land. There's never been a female president of the United States. There's never been a female prime minister of Canada. And I don't know how many female prime ministers there's been of, but I don't think, Mm-hmm. And then with Sagittarius, which is about spirituality and faith and prayer. And so for so long, it's like if you look at the Catholic Church, there's like this huge gender divide of like only men are allowed to be priests. There's only been a male pope, and I can't even get into the Catholic Church. But
yeah. And trust me, none of us even want to.
Yeah. And so there's like, those are very gendered practices in the world. And then the same really goes with the air signs, even just like air as an element in general. Air, it's about the mind. It's about mental acuity. It's about thoughts and words and intelligence. And that is an incredibly gendered thing. Like apparently, it's such a socialized thing and such a strongly held belief for so long in our society that men are more intelligent than women. Men have had more access to going to school and higher education and language and stuff. And while I was doing research for that essay that I wrote, I remember coming across this article, I think it was on HuffPost or Huffington Post, about how our experiences of those types of socialization affect our ability to perform tasks. So this article was talking about asking a cis woman to like do these like little math problems. But before that, she would do these math problems in the test. They would show her a video, and I think that there was kind of these like underlying messages that had words that were like, girls are bad at math, kind of thing. And she like underperformed on the test in comparison to, and the people who experienced that video before doing the test, the women that experienced that video before doing the test underperformed as opposed to the people who didn't. And so these messages like really, really affect us in the world. And so I guess to go through the air signs, Gemini is about language, and there's such a huge divide in how many men are in the science and technology and engineering and math fields. It's like, I think it's almost like 75 to 25%.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because if we think of Gemini as kind of the birth of all information, who is birthing it? Who is sharing the message that we are all then reacting to, like the women you were saying in the study? Like that's
and who is telling the news? Like 70% of the people who are, like the directorial managers of all major news in America and US are men. They're the ones who are deciding what is newsworthy. That's why I'm like, everyone watch Amy Goodman. Everyone watch Democracy Now! Forever. That's my little side point.
Well, then not even on top of that, like they're managing that, and then on top of that, the one company owns it all anyways. And so, like,
and that's it's not holistic at all,
No.
Yeah. And then to go on to like Libra, that's like making the laws. That's how it's been men in these countries in North America. It's always been men's laws. Right? Laws that have to do with controlling the autonomy of our body. And then to go with Aquarius, like invention. Who is allowed to invent things? Who is allowed to create and innovate our world? And, it's like going back to the STEM fields, like engineering and technology is a very, very gendered space. But then you look at like the earth and water signs, like things that are feminized in the world. There's like Taurus, which has to do with food and bodies and pleasure, a very gendered thing, like that women are these like vessels of temptation for men. And but also Taurus is a very hard worker. So like there's women to work the land and make the food. And then with Virgo, it's like, it is, even though we're talking about like, it's not just about cleanliness, it does have a lot to do with cleanliness. There are women to clean the house and do the dishes and support these mundane tasks that keep our daily habits going. That's more like the larger expression of Virgo. Our intestines need daily tasks to happen in order for the world to continue. And then with Capricorn, there are women to manage the family, women who are understanding what the bills are,
that matriarchal
sure the house
grandmother
runs.
role,
Yes.
Too.
Yes, totally. It's very grandmother crone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Totally.
My grandma was a Capricorn. Or she's still alive. She is still a Capricorn.
Yeah.
Explains my Capricorn moon. There were conjuncts.
Maybe she's transcended.
Yeah. Well.
Oh yeah.
She's not far off. So, well, we'll see. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's so fascinating with family conjunctions.
That's a whole other podcast.
So amazing.
That's
a whole other podcast.
It really is. And one day that will happen, because as a Cancer, I must speak on it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'll just finish the last couple of because we're talking. You just brought up Cancer. Cancer is like you're talking about the family, the water signs. It's about like empathy and mothering. And there's like women are allowed to be nurturers.
Yeah,
there's women for having babies, and that's like their whole use. People who have wombs, your use is to have a baby. Or for Scorpio, it's a sign about sex. Women are for sex. They're like these tools that are used for men for sex. Or Pisces, which is like, the healer. Women for emotional labor.
Yeah.
And our world like is totally divided and has been for so long along these lines. But it's so great that we talk so long about how, like, you know, the zodiac is a whole cycle and everyone has all of these needs. You know, men need to have feelings, men need to cry, men need to shed their personas. They need to be crabs, you know, sometimes shed your persona so you can grow.
And I think that the number one,
be a child forever.
Yeah. Well, the number one thing to that, to me, is that, you know, like, release the shame from it. Because that's essentially part of the whole thing, is because, you know, men have to cry. Men feel emotions just like women do. But it's that acceptance and that ridding of shame that will then allow a male that is not normally able to do this to, you know, embrace those more kind of feminine, if we're talking on this more like everything you just discussed, you know, standpoint, which is more, it's healing. Like, I can't even imagine going, as water signs, I can't imagine going through your life without crying.
Yeah.
That sounds painful.
Yeah, it is. It's terribly painful.
It's painful.
Yeah.
And then the same with women too, you know, that just acquiesce to everything, always kind of give in and let other, you know, like more male energy direct their lives in some way, or feel like they can't take control of their life and like assert themselves in ways. That's a part of it too. Because there's no shame in, you know, stepping up and saying what you have to say and going after what it is that you want. And yeah, so it works on both things, you know, both sides of it all. And so how do we get there, Mars? What, how do we get there?
I mean, I really hope that astrology comes back into the forefront as like a very respected part of humanity, because it was for so long. I know you brought up Aquila, and she and I are close friends. And we met on the bus, actually. It was like so random. Yeah. But started a great friendship over it. Yeah, we've talked so many times about how astrology, like back in the day, for like so, like pretty much universally, for like almost all societies in the world, really honored astrology and their own different zodiacs as well. I think that's really important to bring into there, that like there is more to the world than we see.
Yes.
But the thing that I guess Aquila and I really talk about a lot is like a lot of the civilizations where that their traditions still really influence our world. It was like really necessary. It was like essential for people before they were decisional clock, you know. These two worlds of like there was something greater than we see, and empirical evidence were not divorced for most of human history. And now we live in this world that is like, if a scientist with a degree can prove it by judging something through a microscope, we will believe, you know?
It's
and real. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that speaks a lot to the scientific revolution, you know, and that's when kind of the divide happened, where astrology and astronomy were one and the same thing for many, you know, years, centuries.
Most of time.
But most of time, actually, it's only and it was actually through that divide that almost lost astrology. And it wasn't until, you know, kind of like the pop culture brought it back in, you know, the 20th century. And of course it has metamorphosed into something a little different than it looked in the more traditional sense, which I'm very interested in traditional astrology. So seeing that divide that's a whole nother divide. That's a whole nother podcast. It's true. It got separated, and which is a shame. And so I love science. I find science fascinating.
Oh yeah.
But science, much like the gender binary we just talked about, is limiting, because a lot of what it is we experience in this world is not able to be measured or tested. And actually, to me, that is the magic of life. If you are able to test something so rigidly, like where's the excitement, in kind of the mystery of it all? And maybe that's the Scorpio energy talking. But yeah, that's just...
Yeah, that totally. That really reminds me of this, a book that I read a really long time ago. I think it was called The Art of Coincidence by Arthur Kessler, who was a mathematician. And he was talking about writing in large part in the book part of the world, that this is the statistic of something,
Oh, we're having Mars, just so you know, we're having a little, we're having a little technical difficulty. Can you start again with what you were saying about the book?
Yeah, for sure. This book I was reading, The Art of Coincidence, is written by Arthur Kessler, who's a mathematician, was writing about the origins of statistics. And we think of statistics as just like part of the world, like 1 in 20 people like ice cream. You're like, that's a statistic, But statistics were used originally to try to prove extrasensory perception. They were created for that purpose. And something that I found, what we're talking about, how it's like really hard to prove with empirical evidence that are mystery. The thing that I took away over the years from that book the most was that they would do these studies where it's like there's an agent and a receiver. So there's two people in different rooms, or sometimes in these studies in different buildings or even in different cities, where the agent would like have a deck of cards with like 5 symbols. The whole deck of cards, there was only 5 different cards, but like many of them and all shuffled together. And the agent would like pick up a card and look at it, and then like try to send the image psychically to the receiver, who was either in the other room or another building or another city. And they did like hundreds of thousands of these tests. And what they found is that in the beginning, people would guess the receiver would guess what card the agent was picking up and looking at in more often than mathematical chance would allow. But if they did it too much, because they were doing like hundreds of thousands of these tests, the receiver would guess it wrong more than mathematical chance would allow. And I just love that. That's proven by science. Yeah, it's proven by science that we're both psychic, and it's kind of silly to try to abuse it through empirical evidence. Yeah, it's actually harmful to try to abuse it through empirical evidence.
Yeah, because I mean, it's one of the. Speaking as water signs, I use that faculty, constantly. Totally. Yeah. And you'd be selling the human experience short if you were to try to debunk that. And say it's not real or whatever. But, the beauty of statistics, I always like statistics because statistics was one of the only maths that, doesn't have a finite answer.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of statistics to me.
Yeah.
So, anywho, well, our talk is going a little bit long and we are diverting, but I find it fascinating and I hope that you will join me again sometime.
Yes, I'd love to.
On, whatever we want to talk on. So tell people where they can find you. Tell people where this essay is that I keep speaking of.
Yeah, there's an essay just entitled Queer Astrology. It's on my website, which is marsgradiva.com. And that's a mouthful.
Yes, and I will have the links on my blog page and everything. So don't worry if you didn't quite get that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just on my website. It's in the ideas section. There's a few, my website is about using, making visual guides to astrology. So using illustrations to break down the relationships between archetypes. And this is also a visual guide to queer astrology.
Yes. So definitely check those out because It really is fascinating. And I highly recommend, especially it will help, kind of not twist your view, but just give you more things to consider because, I've considered some of the things that we're talking about here today, but I definitely have to say, after reading your essay, I have a lot more considerations on my plate, and it was enlightening in a lot of ways. And I guess that speaks to that moon in Sagittarius of yours. I learned something.
Yeah. Moon connect Mercury. Yeah.
There we go. That explains it very well. So yes, all those links will be in this video on my blog. You'll find it. And I hope you're looking for it because it's fascinating. So thank you again, Mars.
Yes, thank you.
And so where can you find me? Well, you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Energetic Principles. And I have all types of things that happen in both those places. So if you want to find out more, go check that out. And I don't say it as often as I should, but I do consultations, 1-hour consultations, especially when I use astrology and tarot together. So if you're interested in something like that, feel free to hit me up. And as I was saying earlier, I have all my stuff on Patreon, including my moon horoscopes and the weekly custom tarot subscription. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can find that at patreon.com/energetic principles. And that was already a mouthful, but if you like what we talked about here today, because I certainly did, share it with a friend, spread the good word. That's how things get around and ideas get out there. And if you feel so inclined to give me a nice review on iTunes, I won't protest. All right. Thank you so much again for being here, Mars. You're fabulous, and I can't wait to speak to you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, everyone.
Likewise.
And thank you for being there as well. And as always, may the stars be with you.